as an estate planner, I would say it's a little suspicious if you're a beneficiary. But the point is, people you love and care about, and you know that other people you love and care about are going to be adversely impacted. These people in that condition are not inclined to do it. It's perfectly out of character for Jim Morrison to do serious estate planning.
Life's Third Act is a podcast dedicated to helping you get the most out of your retirement. Sponsored by Tucker Allen. Here's attorney CPA Joe Cordell.
So we're back today. We're going to continue talking about Jim Morrison. This is part 2. I hope all of you have seen part 1 that we broke into 2 pieces because it was sufficiently long to where we thought we needed to do that. So we'll pick up with a continuation of that discussion today. And so it's understandable that the band was unhappy with him. And as you said, there was this estrangement and then reconciliation of sorts. And take us from there.
Yeah, so they reconciled, they released LA Woman, and then Jim was like, I think I'm going to move to Paris. And his bandmates were actually like happy for him. They thought that was the right move for him. He was going to move to Paris with Pamela. And like I said earlier, we don't know how much of an influence she had on his drug and alcohol addictions. I mean, we'll go on to see kind of how she dies, and it might lean towards that. She had a big influence.
But we do know she was addicted, right?
Yes.
She was also a heroin addict.
Yes.
Okay.
And so he moves to Paris, and he moves to Paris in March of 1971, and he goes to live with her, and he's writing everybody saying how much of a good time he's having, how he always takes these long walks down like all the boulevards, and he loves the Paris culture. And then all of a sudden, in July, she finds his body in the bathtub, and it looks like he dies of a heroin overdose. There was never an autopsy done, so there's a lot of different theories around this of what actually happened. There's a lot of different stories of what actually happened, so nobody really knows. But a lot of people say it was a heroin overdose that he died of.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I think is the majority opinion. But the coroner at the time said that he thought it was a heart attack.
Yes.
And the reason that doesn't sound silly is that he had gained a lot of weight. There aren't many pictures of him. Most of the pictures we see of him is as this Adonis type, attractive look. But when I started doing some research for this, I don't know if you came across those. Did you see some of those pictures from when he was in Paris before his death? Yes,
I did. And it had actually, I had read actually somewhere that he had started losing some of that weight before his death too. So, I mean, like he looked a lot like heavier. I mean, he definitely looked like he gained weight. And I don't think, combined with the drug and alcohol addiction, that his heart could handle that stress anymore.
Yeah, and that's probably the right way to put it, is it was a combination. He didn't look quite like Elvis did at the end, but he definitely put on weight. So, and he wasn't the attractive guy that many of us think of. But he gets a little, to flesh out this a little bit, is when he gets to Paris, these are people who are close to them. This is what some have said she admitted. Which you don't know this. There's so many people who you can't trust when they're around you and you're famous. But supposedly, one story goes, which is given a significant amount of credence, and it sounds reasonable, is that really Courson was the one who's primarily the heroin addict at this stage.
Yes.
Now, it's true that Morrison would take anything. But Courson apparently had this pretty long-standing heroin addiction and was even being supplied by a wealthy person in a Frenchman, who I suspect there was some sexual relationship in exchange for this. But so she had left it out, and she told someone when she was drinking or something in a moment of candor, this friend who was quoted, that she had left it out and that Jim thought that it was cocaine. And apparently it was this, what do they call it, white lily or something. It's a type of heroin that is supposed to be real strong, was around at the time. And that he took it, this heavy dose of heroin, thinking he was taking something else. It was by no means a suicide. And really Morrison didn't think he was doing anything especially dangerous at that point.
Everything you build for you and your family deserves protecting. All of those important assets you have worked so hard to acquire and enjoy, you want to make sure they're handled with care. At Tucker Allen, our attorneys will customize an estate plan that will work for you and your family's goals and needs. Tucker Allen, estate planning, probate, and trust administration. Visit tuckerallen.com.
So that could be true. I find that a little plausible in the chaos of two addicts living in a house, and that doesn't strain my belief, and it fits with his having a heart vulnerability, as you mentioned, and then he takes this large dose of heroin, and you put them together, and you have it.
Yeah, and I'm honestly really surprised because I read that story too, and it really surprised me that she wasn't charged with anything in his death. And I read a couple other weird stories, but one thing that I kept reading over and over is that he was in the bathtub at 6 a.m. and at some point he asked her, Pamela, are you still there? And she just didn't respond and left him. And so that's why I find it, and I don't know, she might have been under the influence as well. She might have not known what was going on, but that's why I find it a little odd that, we'll go on to see what happens with her, but that she wasn't charged with anything in his death.
Yeah, and it could have been a little like a John Belushi thing. Do you remember that, his death in that bungalow?
Yep.
And the girl, I don't remember her name, but she was later, I don't think she's convicted of anything, but clearly she was determined to be the one who had given him this thing, this hot dose. But so let's move on from there. He dies, and oddly enough, he has a will.
Yes.
Who would have thought that this person that we've been talking about would have a will?
Yeah. And I think that just goes to show, we don't know what happened with the bands when they reconciled, but I think that in those 2 years that they were apart, he kind of started to get his life together. And so I think he might have been quote unquote adulting at that point in time and thought, oh, maybe I should do this. But I found that odd too. I was like, wow, I'm really surprised that he did have one. It, as we'll see, it's not a great one, but he had one. So
he had one, and it had been created within the last year or so?
2 years before his death.
Yeah. So I was very surprised. I'm sure his dad would have been surprised.
Yeah.
But he only named as a beneficiary his girlfriend. And I think if she had died, maybe his sisters. But anyway, his girlfriend was living. So this is Pamela Courson. So he names her, and she inherits everything he has, such as it was.
Yeah, and his estate was his net worth was around $400,000 at the time. And I know I read some things that his family did try to fight it, but just because she was only his girlfriend. But a lot of I think it was California that the will was written in. But
here's what this story gets kind of interesting. Yeah. And you do have to attribute a little bit of deviousness, or at least some planning on the part of Pamela that she would be able to accomplish this in order to have a common law marriage, and that she alleged that they were common law husband and wife. In order to be common law in those states that recognize it, many states do not. Missouri, for example, does not. But those states that do, they require that in addition to having had sexual relations in that state, that you have also held yourself out as husband and wife, that you live there as husband and wife, you live together largely. You don't have to be together all the time, but you have a single household, and that you hold this is a very important ingredient, that you hold yourself out to the public. Otherwise, anybody who lived together and had sex, then they'd suddenly look around and find themselves married by the law. So it does require this holding yourself out, telling people that this is, let me introduce you to my wife, Pamela. So she can always allege with some success that was done somewhere.
Yeah.
So that's not as hard a hurdle to get over, finding people who will say, oh, yeah, I heard him call her my wife. Whether it's true or not, you can find that. But the other thing is they have to have contact in a legal sense of the word. They have to be able to claim the laws of some jurisdiction in the United States. Mm-hmm. So that jurisdiction, it turns out, that was most convenient was Colorado. Now, there's no evidence that they have any meaningful relationship with Colorado, but it was Pamela's testimony that while the band was touring America, which it was during this certain period, going back to, I think, 65, she could have claimed a date later than that. But her testimony was, we stayed in a motel there, we had sexual relations, and thereafter we held ourselves out as husband and wife.
Yeah.
And so if they could claim that at that moment in time they had a relationship with the state of Colorado too, meaning that they were there sufficiently long, or they had an intention to be there with sufficient length, that they could say, we're going to take refuge in the laws of the state of Colorado. So if there's not some relationship, then you can't claim the jurisdiction. I don't want we try not to have this show get technical. So the point is she was able to latch on to laws of a state that would say that she was the wife.
Yeah.
Now, you may say, why is that? You may think, well, why is that significant? Because there's a will that just says everything goes to her. Well, actually, the will's validity was being challenged because it wouldn't take a lot of imagination for someone to argue that when made, knowing this person as we do, Jim Morrison, that there's a good chance he was intoxicated or he is incompetent at that particular time, under the influence, there was duress. I mean, there's so many things that could be alleged with somebody who lived a life like Jim Morrison. And it was so publicly known that he was, in this emotionally unstable, perhaps psychiatrically unstable condition, as well as drug-induced condition. So anyway, so the danger is that when the will is challenged, as this would be, then she needed to be able to take refuge in something else. Mm-hmm. And the thing that you can take refuge in something else if the will fails is, guess what? It would all go to her as the spouse.
Yeah.
Typically all to her.
That's really interesting, too, that you bring up Colorado, because I didn't even think about that. But just from, the knowledge that I have, you can get married in Colorado without an officiant. You just have to have one witness, and then you sign the marriage license. I have had, a lot of friends elope there and do that because they didn't want to have the big weddings. But that's really interesting. Huh. I didn't even think about that. Yeah. So I wonder if that had a role in it, too.
Yeah, well, Colorado is one of those real progressive states. Yeah, they were one of the first with marijuana, decriminalization, et cetera. So anyway, so she had the will stood, then she wouldn't have had to be a common law wife because the will's valid and she inherits. But she knew the parents were going to challenge this, and they did. So she argued, I am a common law wife, which means I can take against the will, and spouses can do that. It's a law. That's true in every state, incidentally, if you're a spouse. So there was litigation that went on, and it went on for many years, but there were a couple of phases. One phase was through 71 to 74. That was the litigation in which she alleged that she was the wife, and this is a valid will. His parents came in and participated and said, no, this is not valid. So ultimately, a judge brought the gavel down and said finally in 74 that no, we're going to recognize her as being the legal wife of Jim Morrison. So now the widow of Jim Morrison. And so that gave her a position that she didn't have before. Now, I should also add during this period of time, there's also litigation going on, the band members against the estate. The band members claimed that he didn't simply have a claim to 25% of the revenues that were generated through the songs that were written, whatever concert revenues and other things which they were still entitled. They argued that he owed money to the band because he had drawn on resources of the band. We don't know that story. I don't know those details, but it's not important except for us to know that we can expect that business associates will sue us when we're gone, and our families, if there is a lot of money there. That doesn't always happen. That's a cynical statement, but I can just tell you my experience has been when there are assets where it's murky and there's a lot of money involved, you'll find that people that often had business relationships with the decedent are the very ones who go ahead and file a claim, which they can do in probate. Remember, that's one of the invitations to probate. If you have a claim, come and let us know. So with that outstanding invitation, people who have relationships and a reasonable claim for a substantial amount of that pot of money, they'll submit those claims. And remember, they don't have to worry about you being there to testify against them. You're gone. So it really puts them in a position where often they can submit claims and make arguments they couldn't otherwise. So in this case, the band members were involved too. So this goes on through 74. The gavel goes down. She's declared the wife. Doesn't mean that the lawsuits or the litigation with the band members is over. That went on for a number of years afterwards until I think 1980.
Yeah.
So you can imagine hundreds of thousands of dollars are being spent here. And guess what? It's coming from Jim Morrison's pot. It's also, though, coming from band members too, but it was worth it for them. Another thing to keep in mind that happened here that kind of explains the band members, and I don't want to demonize these guys. I'm sure they had some legitimate claims, and I don't know the details of this litigation. So let's assume that they do have some legitimate claims that relate to some of what the wife would have been awarded, Pamela would have been awarded. But we also have the phenomenon where this asset that was officially valued at $400,000, the interest of Jim Morrison at his death was declared to be worth $400,000. And now we kind of chuckle because we know, wow, suddenly their music mushroomed in success after he died. And as I argued earlier today, in part because he died, I think. So suddenly, this band that had, as we've said, they had some success, no question. They had 6 top 10 hits, more than that, probably another 7 or 8, maybe 9 that were in the top Billboard Top 100, maybe another 10 that were in the top Billboard 100. So they had some success, but they weren't by any means the most famous band or among the most famous bands in America at that time. They wouldn't have been in the top 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So all of a sudden, there's a ton of money now that's at issue that nobody knew. When they were being casual about who they attributed this song authorship to, no one realized. Now it's suddenly this grand gift that was given them, I would argue, by Jim Morrison when he decided that he was going to have the royalties attributed to the band entirely. So the Doors, whatever the definition of the Doors was, another issue in this case, whatever the definition of the Doors, that's the way they allocate all the money relating to their early albums. So that was a ton of money. Mm-hmm. And it was going to turn out to be a lot more. Some estimates say that even today it's at like $80 million. So anyway, so lawyers get called in, pieces of paper, pleadings, claims, petitions, counter petitions are flying. Money's being spent left and right. Something tells me the record companies are in participating in the fray. Suddenly, the court has said that Pamela is Jim Morrison's surviving spouse. 2 weeks after that, I think it's just like 14 days, right?
Yeah.
14 days after, literally 14 days after that, Pamela dies of a drug overdose. There's no doubt about her cause of death. It was a heroin overdose. Now, she had received $20,000 the day that the gavel went down. She was going to get a lot more, because she was going to be entitled to a claim of 25% of all the revenues associated with the name, the branding, the royalties, et cetera. So I don't know if she's celebrating, but she was a junkie, remember, and she had been a junkie through all this time, 71 to 74. Pretty much everyone agrees. So she has this overdose 2 weeks after the gavel's gone down in 74 and she's declared the wife, just when it's suddenly clear she's going to have this fortune. So guess who would come into the fortune there normally under intestate succession? Remember, intestate succession was you don't have estate planning. Well, she didn't have any kids. She and Jim didn't have any kids, of course. And so guess who it goes to? Her parents. So suddenly her parents are getting this fortune. Now imagine you're the Morrisons for a minute. And I can see this. The Morrisons, granted, they love their son. There's no doubt about that. They had been a little estranged at the end, which, as we've discussed, is very understandable. But they loved him. Mm-hmm. And I think the idea that this girlfriend, who they probably didn't approve of and who, I'm speculating, they probably blamed to some extent for the death of their son, And now these strangers, her parents, are going to inherit what they regard as essentially their son's talent, his success. I'm sure they believe that, his dad wasn't a big fan of his music, but I'm sure his dad would say, well, look, whatever the doors were, it was my son, my crazy son, is the reason.
Yes.
And that's not a bad theory. So anyway, so they're sitting there thinking, this is, whatever money this is going to these strangers, a girlfriend's parents. So they're really galvanized, and they come into court swinging. They are alleging, of course, that the will is not valid, but they're also alleging that the marriage is not valid. So had they, in other words, they were appealing the finding of the court when the gavel went down about her being the lawful wife. So they had to do that in a 1-2 punch. And the reason is it wasn't enough for them to succeed in proving that their son was incompetent when he made the will, because then she would still have the claim under being a spousal election, they call it. And on the other hand, if they didn't challenge that also, then they were still left with the possibility that she would be able to claim through the will. So they had to knock both of those things down, the will as well as the spousal claim. But they were going at it. They had hired lawyers. And apparently there was a sufficient threat to where a deal was made. A deal was finally struck between these two families. And the deal was that the Courson and the Morrisons would split the 25% interest that they were to receive, the Coursons had been to receive over time as ownership of these royalties, as well as an interest in the band and various other things that would flow with that, with intellectual property claims, which includes branding, use of name, concert revenues. I don't know, incidentally, if the concert revenues were going to be allocated. There was finally a settlement that came around in 1980 or 81 with essentially both these families, the Coursons and the Morrisons, to settle what remaining issues existed with the band. That litigation went on, incidentally. So now the Morrisons and the Coursons, that's right, like a song. The Coursons and the Morrisons, are continuing to battle now together, then united forces against the other band members to iron out some of these other issues. So I think that there are a number of lessons here, and I think many of you. Sometimes lessons are, by the time we explain and discuss, the sordid history in some of these cases, many of you could prepare a list of some of the things that I would say. But in this case, I can't resist pointing out that whenever you have somebody who, where there's drug and alcohol involved especially, often it takes someone else to come in and recommend estate planning. And we all have had people we knew who were successful in some sense of the word, whether it was theirs or whether it was inherited, but had since perhaps developed a drug or alcohol problem and their decisions are bad. It would have taken someone to step in with Jim Morrison and to insist that he do some estate planning and do it properly. Maybe all they could get was what was got, which was just a simple will that gave everything to her. Mm-hmm. I can't resist adding, too, that many of people, of course, are not the fans of Pamela Courson, and some think that she was the one who insisted on the will, and some even go so far as to suggest she intentionally had a hand in his death. I didn't put that forward earlier. I'm skeptical. It's possible. But the bottom line is somebody often has to reach in and to somebody like that and get them to take the steps they need to take. And the steps that Morrison took here were not enough. As a matter of fact, it might have been worse than if he had just died. And quite frankly, when you look at this ugly road that lay ahead after his death, if he had died with nothing, then at least it would have gone to the family. Mm-hmm. But he had a relationship with Courson. It's hard to say what he would have wanted. We know what he wrote when he created the will. And maybe things turned out as best they could under the circumstances. But if I were to critique this, as I'm going to do, as an estate planner, I would say I would like to have seen, in this case and similar cases, somebody come in and just direct the person to do the estate planning, drive them, pay for it if it's somebody you care about, It's a little suspicious if you're a beneficiary. But the point is, people you love and care about, and you know that other people you love and care about are going to be adversely impacted. It often doesn't start from within. It often starts from without, getting that estate planning done.
Yeah.
These people in that condition are not inclined to do it. And it's perfectly out of character for Jim Morrison to do serious estate planning. But having said that, were he or were somebody to have driven him and sufficiently prodded him to do estate planning, what should that have looked like? It should have been a trust, no question. When you're leaving assets to people who have problems, even people who don't have problems, people who watch this show know, use trust. Use trust. Don't dump all the money ever. I don't care if your son is Elon Musk. Maybe that's not the best example. I don't care if your son is the best financial planner in the world. You don't give them everything at one time. And you don't even give it to them in huge clumps. Mm-hmm. Instead, you have funds that are held in trust. They're made available on an as-needed basis. If there are occasions when there need to be extraordinary payments, that's fine. It will accommodate that. Apart from that, there's this regular, generous source of revenue, a high quality of life, safety of principle, et cetera. And multiply that, by 10 times when you have somebody who is vulnerable in terms of their judgment, their decision-making. And Pamela Courson was one of those. And for him to have left her what he wouldn't have thought of as a massive fortune at the time, but he knew at that time that it could be significant, to have left it to her with no controls was not a good decision. And there could have been a trust in place, and there wouldn't have been any of these complications that came later, including dealing better with the contracts that govern the relationship with the band members. Mm-hmm. Whenever you do estate planning, it's not just enough for you to think about what are the things that I need to do in order to be that these items go to the people I want them to go to at my death and thereafter. But you also have to be sure that you have in place the assets that essentially will comprise the pot of your life savings, and when you leave complications and wrinkles and uncertainty in business relationships, then even with the best of estate planning, there will still be litigation. Granted, it occurs under circumstances that are more favorable, but still it's litigation, and it's because the litigation the problem wasn't the estate planning. The problem was the items that you put in to the pot that constituted your estate planning. You've got to be sure that they're as clean as can be in terms of the contracts that govern those relationships. So this is taking a step back from simply going to an estate planning lawyer. It's also being sure that your business lawyers have in place the proper provisions and stipulations in your contracts to wipe out any serious threat that's going to arise when these are tried to be enforced, not so much against you, but against people who are more vulnerable than you and whose wherewithal may not be what you have to sufficiently defend them. It's often when the person who would be the guardian of the home is not there that the home is most vulnerable. And remember, you're not there in this scenario. Mm-hmm. So those are just some comments. Jim Morrison was an interesting figure.
Yeah, he definitely was. And I did have a question. Mm-hmm. So if Pamela were to have a will that said, anything of mine goes to my parents, but she had just inherited that and then died 14 days later, how would that have worked out to where it safely went to her parents, or would the Morrisons still have had, a chance at any of it?
Yeah, see, the Morrisons were attacking it upstream. Mm-hmm. So they knew that if they didn't attack it upstream, they had a problem, because if you accept that she owned the asset at the moment she died, then it's all over, because she will have the power to dispose of it as she chooses, even without the will. Mm-hmm. At least then it's intestate succession. But with the will, of course, it's as she chooses. So what they did was they went upstream. Okay. They went upstream to the validity of his will mm-hmm. and the validity of their marriage. Okay. And they knew that if they cut it off there, then it's irrelevant whether she would have a will. Okay. That
makes sense. Yeah, but he was definitely an interesting character. I think he could have gone on to be really, really big. I think the Doors could have been really big without his death. But obviously, as we see in a lot of these, people have addictions, people have dark sides to them, and sad things happen. But I find it interesting that he even had a will. I guess it's a good thing that he did. But like you said, he really should have had a lot of different other things.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's just interesting how big they've become also.
And, people talk about, I don't know how many of our viewers have heard about the 27 Club.
Mm-hmm.
And let's see if I can name the people who died during this era at age 27 of drug overdoses. We'll assume Jim Morrison's one of them. Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, Kurt Cobain, he's a little later, but he was 27. Jim Morrison. Those are only the ones that come to my mind, but just think about that. Is there somebody else you would add to that?
Yeah, so Justin and I were talking about it earlier. We actually pulled it up. But the other big one that actually got it back into the public eye again, because it's not, obviously an official thing, was Amy Winehouse, died at 27. If you know who that is.
I'm embarrassed to say this.
She's a singer. She died in 2013, I believe. But
Amy Winehouse, I know the name. What did she... what genre was?
She was, oh goodness.
Kind of bluesy pop.
Yeah, bluesy
stuff.
pop. She had Back to Black. What is the name of that song? I can't remember. But yeah, she had a couple big hits.
Number of hits. Okay. And it's kind of popular type blues music.
Yeah.
So it is interesting. I mean, age 27, I didn't think it was that young when I was in my 20s. But now I look at that age and, geez, you had so much life ahead at that point. Anybody should have. And each of these people that we've named, or Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, and Jim Morrison, they all became real big after their deaths. I'm more confident that Jimi Hendrix would have been big anyway. I'm reasonably confident that Janis Joplin would have been, less so than I am about Hendrix. But as to the Doors, I don't know. I expressed an opinion on that a while ago that I'm sure will incur the wrath of some of their fans. But I just think dying in this spectacular, high publicity way after you've lived a life of just total insanity. I mean, while we're surprised and disappointed that somebody dies at 27, but if you look at his life, if our viewers read about what he had been doing on stage and off stage from like the mid 60s at least. I mean, sure, it started in college. We know he was arrested, as you said, in college, but that point on, I mean, there had been years of just out of control. I mean, there was destruction and defiance of authority. And just another thing I'll throw in real quickly as we wrap up here is the Doors, to show you how big they were at that time, and I think it was 68 that they were on Ed Sullivan's show. So we know Ed Sullivan is at the time was a stop to, the ultimate in fame. So the Beatles had been on there, Elvis Presley had been on there, but we know that Ed Sullivan's a stickler about things that he thinks, are not proper and decent. So he didn't like the language of light my fire. And he said that word should be changed somehow. His requests were not crazy, but we're not surprised to hear that even though Jim Morrison agreed with the producers that he would comply with these conditions. So he gave, to me as a person who I think when you give your word on something, even if you disagree with it, you stick with it. Anyway, so he said he would, and they get on air, and he doesn't. And he had told his band in advance that he's going to do it the way he wants to do it. And, of course, Sullivan was mad, and his producer told him, you'll never be back on here, to which I'm sure he said, heck with you or whatever. So, I mean, that's the way he lived his life, and whether any type of authority in his adulthood. So his dad was justified in having concerns about his future.
Yeah.
And it is a miracle that he had the level of success he did. And it did contribute to his fame and his infamy, and probably to the revenues that we're getting today, in my opinion. I think it's a bit of a reflection of the way he lived his life.
Yeah, and I'm really surprised that, honestly, it sounds bad, but I'm really surprised he didn't die sooner because, like you said, if you read on his life, there was nobody, controlling him. He didn't let anybody control him. He just did what he wanted to. And, I mean, if you have a girlfriend who's also an addict, that just feeds into it even more. You don't have anybody saying, no, you need to go to rehab. You just have an enabler. And he did a lot. Like you said, he took anything and everything. He probably mixed a lot of things that he should not have. And that just contributed to his overall decline in health. But I mean, even if you have people like that today, combine that with performing shows, and that's a lot of physical stress, physical activity. That's why I'm just really surprised that nothing happened to him sooner.
Yeah. And let me ask you something real quickly before we wrap up. Brian Jones of the Rolling Stones.
Mm-hmm.
How old was he when he died?
He was in the 27 Club, too.
Yeah. There was also Benjamin Kehoe, which is Elvis Presley's grandson. We talked about him on that episode.
Now, is he supposed to be a musician or just
the
grandson?
I think it's just because he was he dabbled in music, but I think it's honestly just because he was Elvis Presley's grandson.
Okay, well, Brian Jones is definitely worth mentioning because he was a member of the Rolling Stones, and so it's interesting about that age 27. But I think it's more a reflection of the condition of rock music at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And the behavior of people in rock music at the time. I think nowadays, for the most part, people have seen what's happened before, and I don't know that you see life lived that way in popular music the way it was at the time. At least on the scale it was.
Yeah, I definitely think there's a lot more factors that go into it. I think now we have so much press and I can't say that word. Publicity. And, social media and people seeing you all over that. I feel like you can't get away with that stuff as easily without, your fans not liking you and you having, nowhere to go from there. But.
Well, there you have it. The Life and Times of Jim Morrison. I hope you found it entertaining as well as informative. There are lots of lessons to be learned here. And I think his story is a very interesting one, whatever you think about Doors music or Jim Morrison personally. Anyway, this has been another episode of Life's Third Act. Till next time, take care.
You've been listening to Life's Third Act, a podcast for thriving in retirement, sponsored by Tucker Allen, your estate and elder law advisors. Each week, we discuss topics and answer questions to help you better plan for your future. For more information, visit tuckerallen.com. Subscribe and listen again next week for another edition of Life's Third Act. The choice of a lawyer is an important decision and should not be based solely on advertisements.